Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Naomi does not listen to anyone who advises her about having an abortion. The sentence arrives like a prophecy in the small town's gossip circles. Naomi, stubborn and precise, has decided. The way people talk about decisions like properties with measurable square footage flattens the chaos of a human heart into an inventory list. But people around Naomi know, or think they know, the deeper weather inside her. A sky that carries storms and sun in the same breath. The rumor is simple on the surface but complex underneath. Naomi is determined not to have a child because she fears it will ruin her carefully ordered life. And yet, in the odd geometry of consequence, she does not realize how her refusal not to have a child, to keep her autonomy, to avoid a destiny she did not choose will also, in ways she cannot yet foresee, fracture the life she clings to so tightly. What follows is not a courtroom drama of right and wrong but an intimate disassembly of relationship mechanics. Naomi's obstinacy is less a moral judgment than a psychological fortress. She has built every wall for a reason. She rehearses the reasons aloud, a litany of practicality, and because she is used to speaking facts, she expects that facts will carry persuasive weight. Her voice becomes a metronome of certainty. There are mortgages to consider, careers to protect, the echo of her parents' tiredness at the dinner table when she was a child. There is also, buried behind the list of practicalities, a recoil against repeating patterns she witnessed growing up, small disappointments morphing into large regrets. Saying no to a child becomes, for Naomi, a defense against the ghost of a life she inherited rather than authored. Danny watches Naomi with a sorrow that holds both patience and a sense of urgency. Danny knows Naomi as someone who thinks in scalpel-sharp lines: remove the rot, preserve the structure. But Danny also sees where that method fails when applied to people rather than plumbing. Naomi's mind, Danny believes, is trapped in a loop of negative thinking that softens only rarely in the middle of the night when sleep has thinned and memories leak in. Danny's own history offers the mirror, a marriage with Bill that battered the edges off her optimism until it cracked. She recognizes the particular, private way a failed marriage teaches a child to be defensive, to choose avoidance over risk. That recognition fuels Danny's insistence that Naomi consider therapy, that she be offered another map of the inner terrain. Danny imagines how a good therapist, a careful listener, could pry open the locked room where Naomi keeps her fears and help her sort them out without judgment. But Naomi's response to Danny is irritability sharpened into a refusal. The idea of therapy, of admitting she might be guided by fear rather than logic, feels like surrender, and Naomi hates to be seen surrendering. Her rejection of Danny's help becomes a performance. She wants to demonstrate that she can be resolute, that her decisions will not wobble under pressure. It is easier to be defiant than to be vulnerable. In the privacy of her kitchen, Naomi practices her lines: I am not making this a moral choice, I am making it practical. She tells herself that being rational will be enough. But at night, when the house is a hollow shell and Jacob's breath is a rhythm she can't always read, she questions whether the practical choice will harden into regret. Jacob's sadness is quieter and more wearing. He walks home like a man carrying a secret weather system under his coat. The decision Naomi has made sits between them like an uninvited guest at the dinner table, bringing with it stale air and a ready list of grievances. Jacob had imagined family arc differently, a house that echoed with small voices, routines that included soccer practice and school plays, the tired contentment of elders who had done together what they could not do alone. He does not demand an exact number of children, he wants the possibility of shared long-term companionship. Naomi's refusal, to him, is an erasure of a future he had been building in his head, brick by small brick. When she says no, Jacob hears not a careful assessment but a verdict, and he is bewildered by how final Naomi's tone sounds. He tries to speak to her, to place words like soft tools between them. I can bend, he offers, attempting to show how compromise could be possible. Naomi's answer is an armored shrug. He looks at her sometimes with the tiredness of someone learning to speak a foreign language. They are members of the same family yet their words don't translate easily anymore. Jacob's nights away from home begin to multiply. not because he has found another person to call his confessor but because the silence in their bedroom has become too sharp. He cannot bear the shape of their lives as it stands and, in that absence of hope, he withdraws. The community notices. People whisper about them because in small towns private repairs always become a part of public record. Rumor seeds suspicion. Naomi sees Jacob's late returns and interprets them through a lens that amplifies fear. Perhaps he is hiding someone. It is easier, she reasons, to attribute deliberate betrayal than to accept the more dangerous, corrosive possibility that they are simply drifting apart. Her jealousy is an odd mixture of self-protection and projection. If Jacob would dedicate himself wholly to a child, she thinks, then she can be relieved of her loneliness. But what if the child exposes a fault line she has not acknowledged? What if Jacob's attention is not the binding force she imagines but the mirror that shows her how small her world has become? Jacob, on the other hand, perceives Naomi as fragile and reactive. He resents her new susceptibility to jealousy and sees it as evidence that a child would multiply a pain that already exists. The paradox is painful. Both fear the future. Both fear losing what they have. They do not speak the same fear in the same code. Naomi laments being invisible. Jacob laments the loss of a shared project. Each believes the other's stubbornness will confirm their own decision. The arguments escalate, and the small things become talismans of greater betrayals. A missing dish, a curt text, a forgotten birthday. The cracks in the structure begin with minor fissures but, over time, will demand more intrusive repairs than either of them is prepared for. Dani continues to push, wearing patience like a second skin. She recounts her own mistakes not as a lecture but as a cautionary tale. I thought avoidance would save me, too. But avoiding pain sometimes just moves it sideways, Naomi. It becomes other people's pain that you then have to carry. She is tender and fierce in the same breath, offering voice notes in the middle of Naomi's workday and bringing dinner over small acts of solidarity that are meant to keep a tether from snapping. Yet Naomi's gratitude is constrained by her anxiety. Accepting help would require a recalibration of self-image. Naomi is allergic to being seen as needing rescue. Bill, who appears only in fragments through memory and in Dani's recollections, becomes a specter in Naomi's reasoning. Dani's failed marriage with Bill is framed as a cautionary tale. Two people who expected each other to fill voids they could not admit to themselves. Naomi absorbs that story and rewrites it into her personal script. Better to keep the void empty than to invite someone in who might eventually cause damage. This is an understandable translation of experience into strategy. But it is also a strategy with limitations. Fear of repeating Dani's fate leads Naomi to a preemptive seclusion that, paradoxically, reproduces the very loneliness she hopes to avoid. Community opinion acts like climate control. The thermostat is set to low but the consequences are widespread. Fan speculation. The kind of conversations that begin at nail salons and at soccer practice pickups suggest therapy as a panacea. She should go to therapy, friends say, and the statement takes on the qualities of a public health advisory even if the person being discussed resents the intrusiveness. Dani shares fan suggestions with Naomi not to shame her but to show that there are multiple ways of seeing a problem. Naomi resents the implication that she needs fixing. Yet at the edge of her resistance, a small curiosity gnaws. What would it be like to put her thought habits under the microscope of a neutral listener? What would it mean to have someone name the patterns without casting blame? Complicating everything is the reality of the pregnancy itself. Biological time ticks and offers little respect for human schedules. Naomi's body becomes a site of decision. There are appointments, tests, and the small, clinical rituals that make the problem feel both smaller and more immense. In the waiting room of a clinic, Naomi reads magazines whose smiles are designed to soothe, while the fluorescent lights cast an unforgiving clarity on every choice she has to make. A nurse offers a list of options as if each were a menu item. Naomi craves decisiveness. Youthful actors of authority wear calm faces and clinical phrases. Naomi says words that are meant to be cold, I want a termination." The phrase feels like a scalpel and a blanket at once. Jacob's reaction to the clinic visit is patterned less by moral outrage than by grief at the shrinking of their mutual future. He comes with quiet flowers that die within a week on the windowsill, an offering of normalcy that Naomi cannot accept without guilt. Sometimes he goes with her to appointments, sometimes he waits in the car. When they sit in a coffee shop afterward, Jacob tries to fold his disappointment into a conversation about logistics, how to recover, how to make the house more of a home without children. Naomi hears the subtext and recoils. She translates his concern into pressure. The two begin to keep separate mental calendars, planning different lives. The fights take on a pattern: initial coldness, followed by a loaded silence, then an eruption. Both of them mistake blame for protection. Naomi accuses Jacob of betraying the future they could have had, of being willing to settle into a relationship so brittle it would not survive aging without children to buoy it. Jacob accuses Naomi of running from the messiness of life, of wanting to absolve herself of responsibility with cruel efficiency. The words they use carve new grooves into their shared history. Arguments that used to be resolved with a tamale on the stove or a shared show at night now leave marks that do not fade easily. There is a rawness to their communication that is unlike anything they have experienced before. In private, Naomi wrestles with a different set of ghosts, images of herself in decade-old photos. A younger face smiling into a camera at whose time she thought everything was possible. She imagines, with surgical detail, an alternate Naomi who said yes to motherhood and then shapes that life into a sequence of choices. She is terrified of losing autonomy, of becoming someone who measures herself by sacrifice rather than by achievement. She is also frightened of the possibility that refusing motherhood might make her an accidental architect of her own loneliness. The tension is not between love and logic but between competing narratives of identity. Naomi's choice, in her mind, is an act of self-preservation. In Jacob's mind, it is a closing of a door that he still hoped was ajar. Danny's compassion takes a concrete form. She offers to accompany Naomi to a therapy consultation. She tells Naomi that therapy is not about being told what to do but about being given maps to understand one's motives. Naomi's reply is to bristle. She hears the offer as an insinuation that she is unfit. Yet Danny does not relent out of judgment. She persists because she recognizes that without an intervention, small resentments become habitual and habits become destiny. Danny offers stories of her own therapy sessions, how being listened to without being fixed changed the shape of her decisions. Naomi listens with half an ear, defenses up, and yet afterwards she spends a long time staring at the ceiling. Outside, the town's rumor mill continues to churn. People choose sides as if auditions for moral leadership were taking place at the local bakery. Some favor Naomi's autonomy as a sign of modern womanhood, others mourn a missed chance at communal continuity. The debate is less about Naomi and Jacob than about the larger anxieties of a community facing demographic change, economic pressure, and the uncertain future of small-town life. Naomi's choice becomes a proxy debate for the town's worries. This external pressure intensifies internal conflict. The more the townsfolk weigh in, the more both Naomi and Jacob feel as if they are living under a glass dome. Jacob, meanwhile, faces his own erosion of certainty. He starts to think in terms of practical separation as a rehearsal for future loss. If they cannot agree on the most fundamental choice of their shared life, he wonders what else will remain aligned. In the clarity of that question, he contemplates leaving not as an act of punishment but as a pragmatic response to divergent life plans. The possibility of separation becomes a demoralizing horizon that both terrifies and seduces him. He has always been someone who prefers action to stalemate. Inaction is a kind of slow decay in his moral universe. If Naomi will not budge, perhaps he believes that the only moral move left is to cut ties that are unlikely to be mended. Naomi's stubbornness is internalized in a way that the world often mistakes for cruelty. She is not cruel, she is terrified and skillful at disguise. She invokes arguments about freedom, career, and the right to choose in order to frame her decision as rational and unsentimental. Underneath, there is a grief for a childhood she did not have, one where choices were visible and mistakes admitted openly. Naomi's strategy is to control the variables she can: the timing of her career, the architecture of her life, the measure of her risks. The pregnancy is an uncontrolled variable, an aberration in her neat ledger. She approaches the decision clinically because she believes that if she can outthink the problem, she can neutralize its threat. Yet human decisions do not respond only to the force of rational argument. They are also shaped by stories, by images and small acts of kindness, by the way another person looks at you when they are afraid. Jacob's sadness is an unadorned human plea, not an ultimatum but a map of what he would lose. He cannot help imagining the small quotidian details of a life with a child's scraped knees, bedtime stories, the smell of crayons, and in those details, he sees a texture of companionship that he fears they will not replicate in old age without children to connect them. Naomi sees those same details and calculates the costs in terms of time, money, attention. Both of them are making projections from incomplete data, which is a generous way of saying they are guessing terrible things about the other's future preference because they are terrified of losing control. As the weeks go by, the pair's conversations are peppered with the language of negotiation but hollowed out by stubbornness. They trade lists and counters, arguments that feel like small legal negotiations rather than intimate discussions. It is an armor that eventually becomes heavier than the fear it was meant to fend off. Meanwhile, Dani continues to mediate. She organizes dinners meant to remind Naomi of other kinds of pleasure. She does not push with platitudes but invites with care, walking in the park where Naomi used to run as a young woman, bringing over old photographs that catalog a life before fear, reminding her that identity is not erased by parenthood nor guaranteed by its absence. Naomi, in these moments, allows herself to be soft, to remember that other versions of her have been content. It is a dangerous softness because it undermines the fortress she has constructed. There are moments of tender ambivalence. Naomi, one morning, finds Jacob asleep on the sofa, the television muted and a book on his chest. She watches him and feels a sudden longing for a simpler bridge between them. She touches his shoulder gently and, for a heartbeat, imagines a different decision, one that includes him and a child and time that folds into itself in easy repetition. But when she allows herself the fantasy, shame rushes in because she believes desire is weakness. She swallows the fantasy like a pill, convinced she can metabolize it away. On nights when she cannot sleep, Naomi writes in a private notebook, documenting everything she feels in a kind of empirical experiment with the self. Her entries are meticulous and sometimes brutal, lists of pros and cons, economic forecasts, imagine worst-case scenarios. She writes as if data will save her. Yet the act of writing also reveals what she cannot calculate: the hollow smallness that sometimes fills her after an argument, the sudden urge to reach for Jacob's hand and find it cold. In ink, she recognizes patterns. Her need for certainty is often a defense against the shame of asking for help. She also notices the compassion she feels for Dani's vulnerability. The notebook becomes a paradoxical confessional, an attempt to objectify emotion that ends up revealing how subjective it remains. Friends suggest compromises, like delay, adoption, foster care, part-time parenthood, all ways to bend the trajectory without breaking it. Naomi hears each suggestion and responds with a logical counter. Delay prolongs indecision, adoption adds layers of complexity, foster care is unpredictable. Each alternative feels like a hedge, and Naomi dislikes hedges. She wants a clear line of sight. Jacob, starving for a sign of shared purpose, sees these alternatives as possibilities for negotiation. He tries, increasingly, to ask about experiments. What if they tried a year? What if they met with a counselor for a 3-month plan? Naomi is tempted by the idea of controlled risk, but suspicion colors her response. Is he looking for proof or capitulation? The story spirals inwards as both protagonists double down on their chosen logics. Naomi's refusal becomes a lens through which she reads Jacob's every move. Jacob's sadness becomes evidence of Naomi's cruelty in his internal monologue. Dani persists as an external conscience and friend, trying to anchor Naomi's perspective in a wider sense of possibility. Outside voices: town gossip, Anonymous online forums, workplace sympathies press in and complicate the decision-making architecture with their own moral verdicts. Personal history: Bill's failed marriage widens the vista of possible future harm in Naomi's mind. The intimate becomes public. Private decisions are no longer purely private. And in the middle of it all sits the small, beating symbol of choice, a life that might be born. The future is a taut string between them, resonant with what they fear and with what they hope. They are not yet at the end. The weeks continue to pass with small escalations and rare reprieves. An argument about household chores ends in a night of uncomfortable sleeping on opposite sides of a big bed. A shared laugh over an old TV show grants a momentary thaw. A doctor's visit provides facts that are unhelpful to the deeper questions. Health is nominal, the pregnancy normal, the timeline indifferent to human angst. What matters is not the medical calendar but the emotional one, which lurches and stalls like an engine with a temperamental carburetor. In the space between one decision and another, Naomi and Jacob find themselves trapped in a negotiation whose terms neither of them wrote down but both are now bound to. The trajectory is clear in its uncertainty. Something will have to give. Whether it will be Naomi's strict autonomy or Jacob's longing for a shared legacy, whether a mediator can bridge the distance or whether the distance will calcify into separation, none of that can yet be said with confidence. For now, the house holds its breath and the small town murmurs. Naomi's choice has become a bell rung in the lives of the people who love her and the lives of the strangers who think they know her story. The silence after the latest argument is dense. It is the kind of quiet that has weight and could fall either into reconciliation or into a fracture that feels irreparable. The narrative has curved inward toward a precipice but has not yet toppled. The next steps are both inevitable and unknown. A tightrope of choices over a valley of potential regrets, hopes, and possibilities.